Neal Isaacs, the Raleigh business broker, coming to you with another content for business owners, business buyers, anybody who's doing a deal. This one's going to be a little bit different, unique. This is a presentation that I've done before for some groups, and it's something that I made. It's a little bit rudimentary, if you will, but I think it tells a story. And so I want to see if I can just share this. I'm going to share my screen. So let's look at this together. So you're doing a deal. I'm an intermediary, so I'm a little bit biased. Some deals, there is no intermediary. You may be the seller, you may be the buyer, but this is how I see it, and I think you may see it this way too. Let's say it starts with an intermediary, and then seller comes into play. In my role as an intermediary, I have a contract with the owner of the business. We call them the seller. And then we go to market, we do some marketing, and we find a buyer. Well, actually, before we find the buyer, we get financial statements from the seller's CPA. So we know the financial story. And then we find a buyer. So we call this the stakeholders in the deal, right? We got a buyer, we got a seller, seller's got the CPA. Is this everybody in the deal? Not even close. So we get a meeting of the minds. Well, the buyer's going to bring in their attorney. The attorney's going to probably put together a purchase agreement at a certain stage to formalize this meeting of the minds. So now we've got four stakeholders outside of the intermediary. Well, the seller's attorney's got to review the APA and make sure it's in the seller's best interest. Are we done with the deal? Well, the buyer's going to have his CPA look at the asset allocation, right? We got to make sure that what's being bought and sold is agreed upon for tax purposes. So the buyer's CPA may be involved. And sometimes there's some negotiation between the buyer CPA and the seller CPA. We got to make sure that they're agreed legally and from tax purposes. Are we done with our deal yet? Well, sometimes it takes a transaction attorney to help the buyer's attorney and the seller's attorney get along. Usually we don't have three attorneys in a deal. Sometimes you do. Or sometimes there isn't a buyer and a seller's attorney. You just have a transaction attorney. But that's another wrinkle to the deal. Oh, but what about the landlord? Let's say this is a retail space. The landlord has a leasehold agreement with the seller. That's got to be transferred to the buyer. So let's get the landlord involved. Well, guess what? Landlord's got an attorney too. You'll hear the landlord say, you know what, I need to run this by my attorney. And that's how these deals work. And we work with everybody's and their attorney as needed. But wait, there's more. What if the buyer's getting a loan from a bank? Well, now we've got a financier involved. And guess what? They probably have an attorney too. Everybody's got an attorney, if you haven't noticed this. And they're not always in the deal, but it's causing the deal to take longer. And I love my attorney friends, but typically attorneys take a little bit longer because they want to do their job and review paperwork. This is one reason why deals take time. And what happens, I find, is that the financier's attorney may have some things to discuss with the landlord's attorney. I call this picking over the corpse. It's a crude way of talking about what they're discussing is if the buyer fails in the acquisition of the business, who gets to take the assets of the business? This is a common thing that is argued about between attorneys. It's called lien subordination. You know, as an intermediary, I've helped to manage those type of things. And there's other types of conflicts that come up. Sometimes the seller's attorney and the buyer's attorney get into it a little bit. Anyway, the intermediary can help to mitigate all of these things. Now, here's an interesting fact. This line right here between the intermediary, this seller's attorney is not even allowed to talk to the buyer. This buyer's attorney is not even allowed to talk to the seller due to the rules of representation. The intermediary can talk with everyone. And again, I'm a little biased, but I think this is part of the value that an intermediary brings is they can see where the deal gets stuck and kind of push it forward. And deals always get stuck, whether it's one of these two conflicts I've highlighted, or let's see if I think I've got some more. Oh yeah, the CPAs can get into it. But let's look at this. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. What if I just ran out of room, but what if instead of a transaction attorney that's a franchise that's being sold, guess what? Franchise has their own attorneys too. Do you see a pattern here? The more stakeholders, the more secondary relationships. By the way, franchisor could be a dealership, could be an affiliation type agreement that's got to be worked through. The possibilities are endless, but there are a lot of complications in these deals. And intermediaries, again, a little biased, but intermediaries can kind of see where the deal is stuck and help to push through. Anyway, I will close out that thing and come back to you here and just say, to me, this is fun. This is a little bit crazy that we deal with so many stakeholders in a deal, and I hope this graphical interpretation is useful for seeing that. But ultimately, everybody's trying to get to the finish line, and an intermediary, a business broker, can help to facilitate that. If you have a very small deal, it's a buyer and a seller, there's no banking involved, there's no landlord involved, there's no other stakeholders between the buyer and seller. If you have an agreement on price, and I would encourage you to get a transaction attorney to close the deal, but maybe you don't even need an intermediary. But if you need somebody to help find your buyer, get it priced, and to get through this entire process and deal with all these stakeholders, that's where a business broker, an intermediary, an M&A advisor, someone like myself can probably add value. That's all I got for you today. If you have questions about what I went through today, like, subscribe, comment, share. If you have a question about your deal specifically, reach out to me directly, direct message me or call me, and I'm happy to talk to you about your deal. I love this stuff. It's fun. And that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Neal Isaacs, the Raleigh Business Broker, signing off.